Night fell slowly, and the sunlight hid behind the trees, as if undressing itself from the day. Aurora, Benjamin, and Lucas stood in front of the old abandoned house, whose weathered walls seemed to guard secrets of a forgotten past. The cold wind blew, and the gentle breeze carried with it a whisper, as if the house itself was calling to them. Aurora, with eyes shining with curiosity and fear, turned to her friends. "Do you think the stories are true?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The mixture of fear and fascination made her feel alive, but also left her anxious. The legends about children disappearing intrigued her, but the idea that something supernatural might be waiting for them frightened her. Lucas, trying to show confidence, replied, "It's just an old house. We can't let ourselves get carried away by town gossip." Deep down, however, his own courage wavered, and he felt a knot in his stomach that he couldn't ignore. He looked at the dark entrance, where shadows danced as if they were alive, and a shiver ran down his spine. Beside him, Benjamin observed the half-open door, anxiety manifesting in his gaze. "Let's go in before we lose our nerve," he said, stepping forward. His voice was steady, but the nervousness that dominated him was palpable. The creak of the door as it opened echoed in the stillness of the night, a grim warning of what was to come. Aurora swallowed hard, feeling the tension in the air, while an icy wind enveloped them, as if the house was trying to welcome them back to a dark past. They crossed the threshold, and the heavy atmosphere soon enveloped them. Aurora clenched her fingers, trying to control the fear settling in her chest. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, eyes wide as she tried to adjust to the darkness of the place. As soon as the door closed behind them, the echo of distant laughter and laments seemed to play with her mind, increasing her unease. They were children's voices, mixed in a chorus that made everyone nervous. "They're just echoes of our imagination." Lucas tried to calm the group, but his voice trembled, betraying his own insecurity. Benjamin looked at the worn walls where old photos hung. His friend's gaze lingered on the images, which seemed to observe them with expressions of happiness that now seemed distant. He felt the weight of those forgotten memories, a melancholic sadness permeating the environment, as if the house held secrets that should never be revealed. "Look at these photos," said Aurora, pointing to an image of smiling children with faces that radiated joy. "They look so happy." But soon a cloud of sadness hung over them, as if the laughter in that image were distant echoes of a time that would never return. "What if something happened to them?" Benjamin asked, the seriousness of his voice breaking the silence. The idea of disappearances began to settle in their minds, intensifying the feeling of discomfort. As they explored the corridor, each step seemed to resonate with the history that place held. "We should get out of here," Lucas suggested, but his voice sounded weak, almost as if he himself didn't believe his words. However, something kept them there, an invisible force that drew them to the unknown. Aurora felt her heart race when the echoes of children's voices became clearer, mixing laughter with cries that seemed to intertwine in the air. "Come on, just a little more," Aurora insisted, determined. Curiosity had taken hold of her, and the desire to discover more about the house's stories outweighed her fear. Benjamin hesitated for a moment, but looking at his friend, he realized he couldn't leave her alone in this search. "All right, but if something weird happens, we run," he commented, trying to hide the fear growing inside him. Each step they took inside the house seemed to echo with the history that place held. The walls, covered in dust, seemed to whisper secrets, making Aurora question how many children had passed through there and what they had experienced. Fear and curiosity were intertwined in her heart. She wondered if the house could offer answers, or if it would only plunge them deeper into mystery. "Look at these marks," Lucas said, pointing to the dusty floor. "It looks like someone was here recently." Aurora and Benjamin approached, and indeed, they could see footprints that weren't from any of the three. Adrenaline rushed through their veins, and the feeling that they weren't alone intensified. "This isn't good," Benjamin murmured, the words coming out in a thread of voice. Aurora looked at her friends, her gaze reflecting the fear they shared. "We should continue," Aurora insisted, the determination in her voice overcoming fear. "We need to find out what happened end here. Lucas took a deep breath, trying to find courage, and agreed. Right, but carefully, he said, his voice firmer now. They advanced, each dealing with their own emotions, but united by curiosity and the desire to unravel the mysteries of the house. As they explored, the echoes of children's voices seemed to intensify, as if the house was responding to their presence. Aurora suddenly stopped in front of a half-open door, her eyes fixed on what appeared to be a small bedroom. Heart racing, she stepped forward, and her friends followed, apprehensive. Inside the room, an old bed still remained, covered with time-worn sheets. Looking toward the corner, Aurora came across a teddy bear, dusty and forgotten. An impulse made her approach it, and upon touching the toy, a wave of memories flooded her, bringing to the surface the image of her sister, who had disappeared a few years ago. The pain she felt intensified, and a tear rolled down her face. "I miss you so much," she whispered, almost as if she expected the bear could hear her words. Benjamin, noticing Aurora's expression, stepped back a bit, seeking a place where he could try to find himself. He looked around, trying to rationalize the voices that still echoed through the house. This can't be real, he thought, but the uneasiness inside him grew stronger. The stories he had heard about the missing children began to mix with his own fears. He remembered the scars he carried, both on the outside and the inside. The house seemed to amplify his insecurity, making him question everything he had ever believed. Lucas, on the other hand, tried to remain steady. He didn't want to believe the legend, but the heavy atmosphere of the house made him doubt his own beliefs. "We should find a logical explanation for all this," he said, trying to sound confident. But as he walked, the presence of the house made him hesitate. The children's voices continued to float through the air, laughing and crying, and he couldn't ignore them. "Maybe it's all in our heads," he murmured, but the doubt in his voice betrayed his true state of mind. The trio continued to explore, each dealing with their own emotion. Aurora felt lost between sadness and hope, while Benjamin fought against his scars, and Lucas tried to find logic that seemed to slip from his grasp. The house was full of forgotten objects that brought to the surface memories and traumas they didn't know they were ready to face. As they moved from one room to another, each object found seemed to tell a story. A broken toy, a faded photograph, a yellowed letter. Each item was loaded with memories, and the connection they felt with the past only increased the tension in the air. Aurora stopped in front of a dusty window, looking at the outside world, but her heart was trapped within those walls. She wondered how many children had been there before them, how many had shared laughter and tears in that same place. The atmosphere of the house enveloped them, and the echoes of laughter and lament seemed to intensify. They were about to discover that the house was not just an abandoned place, but a space where their own stories and fears were about to intertwine with the echoes of the past. And without realizing it, each of them began to confront not only the secrets of the house, but also their own inner demons. The abandoned house continued to envelop them in its frightening silence. Aurora, Benjamin, and Lucas cautiously advanced through the dusty rooms, their feet raising clouds of dust with each step. Shadows danced around them, and the air was heavy with the smell of mold and age. It was as if the place was watching them, waiting to reveal its secrets. Aurora stopped in front of a small room where an old bed still remained. The floorboards creaked under her weight, and she hesitated as she looked toward the corner, her eyes fixed on a teddy bear covered in dust. The image of the toy made her feel a strange connection, as if it held stories that were just waiting to be told. When she touched the bear, a wave of memories flooded her, bringing to the surface the image of her sister, who had disappeared a few years ago. The pain she felt intensified, and a tear rolled down her face. "I miss you so much," she whispered, almost as if she expected the bear could hear. Benjamin, noticing Aurora's expression, stepped back a bit, seeking a place where he could try to find himself. He looked around, trying to rationalize the voices that still echoed through the house. This can't be real, he thought, but the uneasiness inside him grew stronger. The stories he had heard about the missing children began to mix with his own fears. He remembered the scars he carried, both on the outside and the inside. The house seemed to amplify his insecurity, making him question everything he had ever believed. Lucas, on the other hand, tried to remain steady. He didn't want to believe the legends, but the heavy atmosphere of the house made him doubt his own beliefs. "We should find a logical explanation for all this," he said, trying to sound confident. But as he walked, the presence of the house made him hesitate. The children's voices continued to float through the air, laughing and crying, saying, and he couldn't ignore them. "Maybe it's all in our heads," he murmured, but the doubt in his voice betrayed his true state of mind. The trio continued to explore, each dealing with their own emotions. Aurora felt lost between sadness and hope, while Benjamin fought against his scars, and Lucas tried to find logic that seemed to slip from his grasp. The house was full of forgotten objects that brought to the surface memories and traumas they didn't know they were ready to face. As they moved from one room to another, each object found seemed to tell a story: a broken toy, a faded photograph, a yellowed letter. Each item was loaded with memories, and the connection they felt with the past only increased the tension in the air. Aurora stopped in front of a dusty window, looking at the outside world, but her heart was trapped within those walls. She wondered how many children had been there before them, how many had shared laughter and tears in that same place. "Look at this," Aurora said, pointing to an old photo that was hanging on the wall. She approached and removed it from its place, holding it delicately. Their children, they looked so happy, but soon a cloud of sadness hung over them, as if the laughter in that image was a distant echo of a time that would never return. "What if something happened to them?" Benjamin asked, his tone now more serious. The idea of disappearances began to settle in their minds. Lucas, trying to stay calm, replied, "I think we should consider that these are just stories. We can't let ourselves be carried away by fear." However, his voice sounded weak, almost as if he himself didn't believe his words. Aurora looked at him, and the concern in her gaze was evident. "But what if it's not just that? What if these children really need help? We need to get out of here," Lucas suggested, but the hesitation in his voice was clear. Aurora felt her heart race when the children's voices became clearer, mixing laughter with cries. It was as if the house was alive, telling its stories through echoes. "Come on, just a little more," Aurora insisted, determined. Curiosity had taken hold of her. Benjamin hesitated, but looking at his friend, he felt he couldn't leave her alone. "All right, but if something strange happens, we run," he commented, trying to hide his fear. Each step they took inside the house seemed to resonate with the history that place held. The walls, covered in dust, seemed to whisper secrets. Aurora wondered how many children had passed through there and what they had experienced. Fear and curiosity were intertwined in her heart, while the house with its shadows and mysteries awaited them. Amid their exploration, Lucas remembered something he had read about the house. "Do you know that some people believe the souls of children who disappeared here still wander these corridors?" He tried to sound casual, but the tension in the air made his voice falter. "It's just a legend," he added quickly, as if trying to convince himself. "But what if it's true?" Aurora inquired, her gaze deepening into the shadows around them. "What if they're still here, waiting for someone to help them?" The idea frightened her, but at the same time, it ignited a flame of determination within her. Benjamin observed her, realizing that Aurora's curiosity was transforming into a need to understand what had happened. As they continued to explore, they found a small room that seemed to have been abandoned in a hurry. The floor was covered with broken toys and yellowed papers. Aurora crouched down to examine one of the toys, a small wooden car. "This is so sad," she murmured, holding the car in her hands. "These children never had the chance to grow up, to live their lives." Benjamin, who was by her side, felt the weight of those words. "It's as if the house is remembering each of them," he said, his voice low and reflective, "as if each object here holds a piece of their story." Lucas, who was standing a bit further away, looked at his friends and felt torn between logic and the emotion that permeated the environment. "I think we need to focus on understanding what really happened," Lucas suggested, trying to bring the focus back to reality. "We should look for clues, something that tells us what happened to these children." His tone was firm, but the anxiety in his gaze didn't go unnoticed. "Yes, but what if the clues lead us to a place we don't want to go?" Aurora questioned, her gaze getting lost in the shadows. "What if this house isn't just a place, but a symbol of what happened?" Benjamin looked at his friend, feeling the intensity of her words. He knew there was more there than just dust and shadows. There was pain, untold stories. Meanwhile, the echo of distant laughter and laments seemed to play with their minds. Benjamin turned to the dark corridor in front of him, where light barely reached. "Let's move forward," he said, his voice steady but his heart beating fast. "We need to discover the truth." Aurora and Lucas agreed, and together they moved forward, each carrying their own insecurities, but united by the determination to unravel the mysteries of that house. house. As they advanced, the feeling of being watched increased. Aurora felt a shiver on the back of her neck and looked behind her, as if expecting to see something or someone. "Do you feel that?" she asked, her voice hesitant. "It's like we're being followed." Lucas forced a nervous laugh. "It's just our imagination. This house is playing tricks on us, that's all." But Benjamin wasn't so sure. He looked around, the shadows seeming to move in a strange way. "What if the stories are true? What if the children really are here?" His voice was full of a fear he couldn't hide. "We need to be careful," he added, trying to stay calm. The tension increased with each step, and soon they found themselves in a room that looked like an old cafeteria. The tables were overturned, and remains of rotten food covered the floor. Aurora approached a table and found a broken bottle. "Look at this," she said, holding the pieces of glass. "It's as if time stopped here." "That's what's scary," Lucas commented, looking around. "What happened to these children? Why didn't they leave this place?" Aurora sighed, thinking about the answers she was seeking. The abandoned house seemed to live a new life as Aurora, Benjamin, and Lucas leafed through the pages of the diary. The silence, now broken only by the sound of their voices, created a tense but intriguing atmosphere. The words written by the children who once inhabited that place reverberated in their minds, each sentence carrying the emotional weight of forgotten memories. The afternoon light filtered through the dusty windows, casting dancing shadows on the worn wall. "Look at this," Benjamin said, his voice trembling as he pointed to a specific passage. "This child, she looks like me." Aurora and Lucas's eyes widened as they looked at the image trapped between the pages. It was an old photo, faded by time, but the resemblance was undeniable. The boy in the photo had the same brown hair and the same curious expression that Benjamin frequently displayed. A chill ran down Benjamin's spine, and he held his breath, feeling the weight of the discovery. This is incredible," Aurora murmured, her voice laden with disbelief. "You might have a connection with this child, but what does it mean?" Her gaze was intense, as if trying to decipher the mystery that linked Benjamin to that image. "Maybe it means there's something more here than we thought," Lucas said, trying to stay calm. He felt the situation was intensifying, and the logic he had always sought was dissolving amid the emotion of the moment. "But what if it's just a coincidence? Many children can look alike, you know." Benjamin shook his head, unable to take his eyes off the photo. "No, it's not just a coincidence. I feel it. It's as if I were connected to this story somehow." His voice was becoming increasingly firm, despite the fear that invaded him. He began to remember the stories his mother told about an older brother who had disappeared as a child. This new discovery seemed to open a door to a past he had never explored. "We need to understand what happened," Aurora insisted, determination growing within her. "These stories aren't just from the past. They can help us understand what happened." She looked at her friends, her gaze determined. "We need to continue reading." Lucas, despite hesitating, agreed. "All right, let's see what else we can discover." They settled on the sofa, the tension in the air palpable as Aurora continued to read aloud. The children were having fun in the garden, but they were always aware that something was watching them. They talked about a shadow that moved between the trees, a presence that made them feel afraid, but also an inexplicable curiosity. One of them, named Clara, said that the shadow called them to play, but the others always hesitated. "That's disturbing," Lucas commented, feeling a shiver. "I think this only increases the feeling that the house has something to do with all this. It's as if it were alive." "Yes," Aurora agreed, her gaze fixed on the words. "What if the children didn't just disappear, but were attracted by this shadow? What could have happened to them?" She felt a knot forming in her stomach, the growing anguish as she imagined the children's fate. Benjamin, who had been silent, shook his head. "I don't want to believe that something so terrible could have happened, but what if it's true?" He looked at the photo again, the weight of the connection he felt intensifying. "What if I'm part of this?" "You shouldn't carry this burden alone," Aurora replied, her voice soft but firm. "We're here with you. We need to discover this together." The group continued reading, each page revealing more about the lives of the children who had passed through the house. The stories were full of joy and gradually became somber. The accounts of games and laughter gave way to descriptions of fear and despair, and the atmosphere in the room became increasingly heavy. At one point, Lucas stopped reading, his expression tense. "Wait, It says here that the children started having nightmares about the shadow. They talked about a voice that whispered their names, a voice that promised fun and adventure, but also left them afraid. Something was wrong. That's exactly what the house is doing to us, Benjamin commented, the uneasiness in his voice evident. We're being drawn to something we don't understand. What if we can't get out of here? We can't think like that, Aurora said, trying to keep hope alive. We need to continue. If these children are trapped here, maybe we can help them, but we need to understand what happened. She looked at Benjamin and Lucas, seeking support in their gazes. Right, Lucas took a deep breath, deciding to join Aurora's determination. Let's continue. We need to find out what else is hidden in this diary. He leaned in to listen better as Aurora resumed reading. One night, Clara and her friends decided to follow the shadow. They couldn't resist the call. When they approached, the shadow revealed itself as a hooded figure, which made them feel a mixture of fear and fascination. The figure promised to take the children to a place where they could play forever, but at the same time warned them never to look back. What does that mean? Benjamin asked, his voice trembling. What happened after that? Aurora looked at the next page, her heart racing. No, I can't read this. She hesitated, emotion almost preventing her from continuing. They disappeared. Lucas frowned, absorbing the gravity of the situation. What if this is a warning, a caution about what happens when you let yourself be carried away by curiosity and fear? We need to be strong, Benjamin said, his voice laden with determination. We can't let the house dominate us. We need to face this. We need to understand what's at stake. He looked at his friends, his eyes shining with a new light. If there's a connection between us and these children, we need to find out what it is. Aurora nodded, feeling courage growing within her. Yes, let's continue. Together, with renewed determination, they advanced in their reading, each word echoing in their hearts the pain and hope of the children who had passed through there. The voices around seemed to dance in harmony with their emotions, encouraging them to proceed, to face the unknown, and to unite in search of answers. And so, as they leafed through the pages of the diary, the trio felt they were about to unravel not only the secrets of the house, but also the essence of who they were and what they were capable of facing. Each word carried a weight, but also a promise that together they could find the path to light, even amid darkness. Aurora, Benjamin, and Lucas were gathered in the small, dusty room where a dust-covered teddy bear seemed to guard the secrets of a long-forgotten past. The atmosphere was charged with emotions, and each of them felt the weight of the memories that the house evoked. Aurora, with trembling hands, caressed the bear, her mind fixed on the memories of her missing sister. The connection between the toy and her own pain was almost palpable. "I can't believe we're here," said Aurora, her voice choked. "This house, it holds so many stories, and I feel that my sister's is among them." She looked at her friends, seeking comfort in familiar faces. Benjamin, who was a little distance away, observed Aurora's expression with concern. "If you want, we can look for more clues. Maybe we'll find something that helps us understand what happened," suggested Benjamin, breaking the silence. His voice was gentle, but there was a veiled determination in it. He knew that memories could be painful, but he also believed that truth could bring a certain relief. Lucas, still trying to maintain logic amid the whirlwind of emotions, crossed his arms. "But what if we don't find anything? What if all this is just made-up stories? We're letting ourselves be carried away by emotion." He was restless, moving from side to side, as if the house itself was pressuring him to make a decision. "Lucas, this isn't just about finding answers," intervened Aurora, her voice rising slightly in intensity. "It's about understanding the pain we're carrying. I can't ignore this." She looked at him, her eyes shining with determination. "I can't let fear prevent me from seeking the truth." Benjamin nodded, realizing that Aurora was right. "We need to do this together. If there's something here that can help us, then we should look for it. The house may be full of secrets, but it can also give us answers." He approached Aurora, placing his hand on her shoulder, offering comfort. Lucas sighed, finally recognizing that he was being selfish. "Okay, I understand. Let's look then, but we need to be cautious. We don't know what else this house might hide." He wasn't completely convinced, but the determination on his friends' faces was contagious. With a new sense of purpose, the trio decided to explore more deeply. Aurora took the lead, her curiosity guiding her through the dark corridors. They passed through a narrow hallway where light filtered through dusty windows, creating shadow patterns on the walls. The air air was impregnated with a smell of mold and abandonment, and each step echoed like a lament. "Look at this," said Aurora, pointing to a door that was ajar. She hesitated for a moment, her heart beating strongly in her chest. "Should we enter?" Fear and excitement were mixed in her voice. "Let's go," Benjamin responded firmly, pushing the door and revealing a room that seemed to have been left in a state of suspension. The environment was covered in dust, but it was still possible to see a small, improvised altar with melted candles and dried flowers. It was a sign that someone had been there, perhaps seeking consolation. "This is strange," Lucas murmured, observing the altar with caution. "Who would remember something like this in this house? What does it mean?" He approached, trying to understand the gravity of the scene. "Maybe it's a place of memories," Aurora suggested, her voice soft. "A place where people came to remember those they lost." She crouched near the altar, touching the dried flowers delicately. "This might be what we need, a connection to the past." Benjamin, beside Aurora, looked around, his eyes fixing on a small wooden box that was partially hidden under a pile of dust. He crouched down to pick it up, feeling the weight of the object in his hand. "What could be in here?" he said, curiosity now overcoming his fear. "Open it, Benjamin," Aurora encouraged, her heart racing with the possibility of what they might find. Lucas stood beside them, watching attentively. With a bit of effort, Benjamin managed to open the box. Inside, there was a collection of various objects: a doll with a faded dress, a necklace of colorful beads, and a small diary, its pages yellowed and worn. The sight of the items made Aurora's heart race. It was as if each object told a story, and she was about to hear some of them. "Look at this," he said, holding the diary carefully. "We can read it and see what else we discover." There was expectation in the air, and the three sat in a corner of the room, ready to dive into the stored memories. Benjamin began to leaf through the pages, and soon read aloud. "Today, I played with my friends in the garden. We had a bicycle race and laughed until our stomachs hurt. I love summer." The writing was childish, but full of life and joy, the words of a child who had lived happy moments. "That's so beautiful," Aurora commented, a sad smile on her lip. "But at the same time, it's painful to know that these children, they're not here anymore." The melancholy of the situation enveloped her, and she felt the need to share her own story. "I remember when my sister and I used to play together," said Aurora, her voice choked. "She always made me laugh, even when things were difficult. I wish she was here to see this." The pain in her words echoed in the silence of the room. Lucas, touched by Aurora's vulnerability, decided to open up as well. I never had a normal childhood. I was always the boy who isolated himself, trying to be perfect. But at the same time, I always wished I had friends I could play with, like these children." He looked at the diary, as if the words written there could help him understand his own story. "And now we're together," Benjamin said, looking into his friend's eyes. "That's something we need to value. The connection we have is real, and we don't need to face our fears alone." He held the diary firmly, as if making a promise. Aurora, feeling the strength of her friends beside her, decided it was time to continue reading. "Let's see what else we can discover," she said, with a gleam of determination. "These children deserve to have their stories told." As Benjamin leafed through the pages and read more stories about games, laughter, and happy moments, the trio realized that the house, with all its shadows, was also a place of light. The children's voices that before sounded like laments were now echoes of lives lived, of joys and sorrows that formed a whole. "This is a reminder that life is made of ups and downs," Aurora said, with a look of understanding. "Each of us carries our own stories, but together we can find meaning in our experiences." Lucas and Benjamin nodded, understanding that the search for answers was also a journey of self-discovery. Reading the diary became a ritual, and each shared their own memories, fears, and desires. The past, which before seemed a burden, now became a guide, illuminating the path ahead. At that moment, they were no longer just friends. They were a family united by pain and hope, ready to face the challenges that the house still had in store for them. The tension in the abandoned house seemed palpable, like a dense fog that settled in the air and made it difficult to breathe. Aurora, Benjamin, and Lucas stood in a small corridor, surrounded surrounded by cold, dust-covered walls that seemed to whisper secrets of a past that no one else dared to explore. The children's voices that were once distant echoes now reverberated in their hearts, challenging them to confront not only the mysteries of the house, but also the fears that each carried within. Aurora, with the diary in hand, looked at her friends, a mixture of determination and fear in her eyes. "We need to do something," she said, her voice trembling. "These children, they're trapped here just like us." The weight of her words hung in the air, and Lucas, who always tried to find a logical explanation for everything, found himself struggling with the urgency emanating from his friend. "But what can we do?" Lucas questioned, trying to maintain logic in his mind. "We can't just talk to them. That's not how things work." He felt a growing agitation within himself, a conflict between reason and emotion that left him restless. "Maybe it's not just that," Benjamin intervened, his voice carrying a more serious tone. He looked at Aurora, feeling the pain she carried. "They need to be heard. If we remain silent, what will happen to them?" The question hung in the air, and the group felt that the house was watching them, as if waiting for an answer. Aurora took a deep breath, allowing the anxiety consuming her to transform into courage. "I can't run from this anymore. My sister, I miss her every day. I don't understand why she had to go away." The words came from her heart, laden with emotion, as she tried to convey the weight of her pain. The voices around them seemed to calm down, as if they were listening. Lucas, seeing Aurora's vulnerability, began to question himself. What if these voices really are the children, he thought? Or what if they're trying to tell us something? He looked at Benjamin, who also seemed to be fighting his own demons. "I've always felt insecure," Benjamin began, his voice hesitant. "I always thought I wasn't good enough, but if I want to get out of here, I need to face this." His gaze was intense, and Aurora felt a wave of empathy. They were united in the fragility of their experiences, and the sincerity being shared was a step toward healing. Lucas, who until then had tried to rationalize his feelings, realized he needed to open up too. "I've always wanted to understand everything, but now I see that I can't. I'm here with you, and I feel that we need to unite. Your voices are part of me now." The sincerity in his voice was palpable, and the three friends felt more connected than ever. As they spoke, the children's voices increased in intensity, but in a strange way, they seemed to become softer, almost like an encouraging whisper. Aurora felt that the house was listening, and the atmosphere around them began to change. The walls, which before seemed oppressive, now seemed welcoming, as if they wanted to embrace them in their moment of vulnerability. The emotional connection between the friends grew stronger as they shared their pain. The life stories that were once shadows in their minds now became light, illuminating the path to acceptance. However, the awareness that true liberation might require a sacrifice hung in the air, creating a tension they could almost touch. "We need to find a way to help these children," Aurora said, her voice firm but gentle. "Maybe we can make a promise. We promise not to forget these children and to fight for them, even after we leave here." The idea resonated among them, and Benjamin's eyes shone with new determination. "Yes, that might be the key," Lucas agreed, feeling that Aurora's proposal was not just a way to face the past, but also a way to find purpose in the present. "We need to commit to remembering them. They deserve to be remembered." The trio united in a circle, their hands intertwining. The simple act of uniting seemed to create an even deeper connection between them. Aurora felt a wave of warmth pass through her body, as if the house was recognizing their determination. "Let's do this together," she said, looking into each of her friends' eyes. "We're here for each other." With this promise, a heavy silence took over the environment. The children's voices began to calm down, and a sense of peace began to settle in the room. The trio felt a weight being lifted from their shoulders, as if they were freeing themselves from invisible chains that bound them to pain. Benjamin, emotional, looked at Aurora and Lucas. "I don't know what's coming, but I feel we're ready to face it together." The determination in his voice was contagious, and Aurora and Lucas felt a new spirit rising within them. As they remained there, united in their promise, something began to change. The house, which before was a place of fears and shadows, now transformed into a space of welcome and understanding. The children's voices, which before cried out for attention, now seemed to sing a soft melody, as if they were finally finding peace. Aurora looked around, feeling that the house was breathing with them. "Maybe this is what they needed," she whispered, "to be heard, recognized. Maybe our pain helps them find freedom." The words floated in the air, and the trio felt that somehow they were becoming part of that story. Lucas, reflecting on what had happened, began to understand that pain was not something to be avoided, but rather something to be faced. "I think I realize now," he said. "Pain is part of life. We all feel it, but it's how we deal with it that matters." He smiled at his friends, feeling lighter. The atmosphere in the house, previously heavy and oppressive, now seemed to vibrate with renewed energy. The children's voices, which before were a desperate cry, now echoed like a chorus of support. The house had tested them, but together they had found a path to acceptance and understanding. "Let's always remember this experience," Aurora declared, her voice firm. "These children should not be forgotten. They are part of us now." Benjamin and Lucas agreed, feeling that they were moving away from the house, but taking with them the lessons they had learned. With one last look around, the trio prepared to move forward. They knew the battle was far from over, but they also felt that together they could face anything. The house, with all its mysteries, had become a symbol of transformation, and their journey was just beginning. As they walked toward the exit, the feeling of freedom began to settle in their hearts. The house, now just a shadow in the background, had become a place of learning and connection. They would leave behind not just a physical space, but also a legacy of love and courage that would accompany them forever. Aurora, Benjamin and Lucas stood in the heart of the abandoned house, surrounded by a dense and oppressive atmosphere. The children's voices echoing around them seemed to intensify the feeling that they were about to face something much greater than their own insecurities. The house, an old and decaying structure, seemed to pulse with life, each shadow and whisper carrying an emotional weight that challenged them to confront their deepest fears. Aurora, with her heart racing, looked at her friends and with a trembling voice said, "I can't run from this anymore. I feel like we need to help these children. They're trapped here just like us." Her determination was palpable, although the pain in her gaze reflected the internal struggle she was facing. The voices around them, which before seemed like distant echoes, now sounded like cries for help, and she knew she needed to do something. Benjamin, who was by her side, felt the weight of Aurora's words. He took a deep breath and said, "If we want to get out of here, we need to face this together. We can't let our fears control us." The determination in his voice was a reflection of what he had learned from his experiences. He knew that the house wasn't just a building, it was a symbol of everything they had suppressed in their lives. Lucas, who until then had tried to rationalize the situation, began to perceive the depth of what was happening. He looked at his friends and, with sincerity, said, "I've always wanted to understand everything, but now I see that I can't. The voices of these children, they're part of me now." The vulnerability in his voice shocked the others, and he felt that he needed to open up more. "I'm afraid of losing control, of letting myself be carried away by emotions, but maybe that's necessary." The tension in the air increased as the three friends united in a circle, their hands meeting in the center as a gesture of solidarity. Aurora, with tears in her eyes, began to speak again. "Let's listen to what they have to say. If these voices have something to tell us, we need to be ready to listen." Her determination was contagious, and Benjamin and Lucas felt a wave of courage forming between them. "Let's do it," Benjamin encouraged, looking into Aurora's eyes. "We're in this together, no matter what happens." He felt that the connection between them had strengthened, and this gave him a new perspective on the situation. It was as if the house was feeding on their insecurities, but now, for the first time, they were ready to face this head-on. With his hand still intertwined with his friends, Lucas took a deep breath and began to speak. I always thought that reason was above everything, but now I realize that sometimes you just need to feel. I feel that these children need us, and we need them. They shouldn't be forgotten." His gaze was serious, and the vulnerability in his words made the air around them seem lighter. Aurora, touched by Lucas's sincerity, felt that her own emotions were about to overflow. "I miss my sister. I don't understand why she had to go away. I wish they knew they're not alone." Tears streamed down her face, but instead of sadness, there was a feeling of liberation. The act of sharing their pain seemed to create a bridge between them and the voices calling in the house. Benjamin, seeing Aurora's struggle, decided it was also time to open up. He looked at his friends, feeling more vulnerable than ever. "I've always felt insecure. Sometimes I feel like I'm not enough. The house house made me see that we all have our pain, and that doesn't mean I can't find strength within myself." His voice trembled, but there was a new determination in his words. He knew he needed to face his scars. As each shared their emotions, the voices around them began to calm down. The echo that previously seemed threatening now sounded like a whisper of support. Aurora realized that by opening up to each other, they were creating a safe space where they could collectively face their fears. "I promise I won't forget these children," Aurora declared, her voice now stronger. "We need to do something for them. They deserve to be remembered." The conviction in her words echoed in her friends' hearts, and Benjamin and Lucas agreed in unison. "Let's make a promise," Benjamin suggested, his voice laden with emotion. "We promise that regardless of what happens, we won't forget these children. We won't let their stories be lost in time." He felt that the house was transforming, changing from a place of pain to a space of welcome and understanding. Lucas, in a moment of clarity, added, "And we also promise that just as they fought, we will fight too. We'll support each other and be the voice they didn't have." The three friends looked at each other, feeling the strength of the promise they were making. The energy around them seemed to vibrate in response, as if the house was recognizing the determination growing among them. With this new understanding, silence took over the environment. The children's voices began to calm down, and the trio felt a wave of relief and hope. The weight they had carried for so long was being alleviated, and the house, previously oppressive, began to seem like a space of acceptance. Aurora, looking around, realized that the atmosphere had changed. "I feel like we're making progress," she said, a shy smile forming on her face. "We're facing our fears, and that's an important step." Benjamin and Lucas agreed, each feeling that the journey they were taking together was transforming them. "Yes, and this is just the beginning," Benjamin affirmed, his voice full of determination. "We're here for a reason, and we need to keep fighting, not just for ourselves, but for all the children who came before us." The conviction in his words resonated with Aurora and Lucas, who felt the strength forming between them. With lighter hearts, the friends were ready for what would come next. They knew that the fight against the past and the voices calling for help wasn't over yet, but they were determined to face it together. The house, with all its mysteries, would become the setting for their struggle for liberation, and they were ready to move forward, side by side, in search of answers and peace. The night was quiet, but the weight of the experiences lived in the abandoned house still hung over Aurora, Benjamin, and Lucas like a dense cloud. The silence of the forest around them contrasted with the echoes that still reverberated in their minds. They walked together, but each was immersed in their own thoughts, reflecting on the journey they had just faced. Aurora was the first to break the silence. "Do you remember what I said about my sister? I feel like the house was trying to help me deal with it. I never managed to talk about losing her. It was always so painful." Her voice trembled, but there was a new determination in her words. "That house made me realize that I can't keep this to myself anymore. I need to find a way to honor her." Benjamin, walking beside her, looked at the ground for a moment before responding. "You know, I never thought I'd have the courage to open my heart like that. In the house, when you talked about your sister, something inside me broke. I realized that hiding my insecurities didn't help me at all. We need to face what we feel, even if it's difficult." He looked into Aurora's eyes, seeking mutual understanding. Lucas, who was a bit behind, stepped forward and said, "What if we created a ritual, something that would help us remember the children from the house and honor their memory, just as you intend to do with your sister?" He had a gleam in his eyes that showed his excitement about the idea. "Maybe we could go back there on a specific day and do something for them. A small ceremony where we can talk about our experiences and what they mean to us." Aurora smiled upon hearing Lucas. "That would be amazing. I'd love to do that. It's a way to keep their memory alive and at the same time help us deal with what we've experienced." Her excitement was contagious, and Benjamin also began to get excited about the idea. "Maybe we could bring flowers or something symbolic, something that represents what they meant to us," suggested Benjamin, already visualizing the colorful flowers adorning the space around the house. "I want them to know they weren't forgotten, that their stories matter." The three looked at each other, and that moment of connection brought unexpected relief. The pain and weight they had brought with them were beginning to dissipate, giving way to a feeling of hope. The friendship they had cultivated in the house now became a support for what was to come. "When should we do this?" Lucas asked, his tone full of expectation. How about next month on the day we found the diary? Aurora suggested. That was a significant day for us. And, in a way, for the children too. It's as if they had guided us there. I like that, Benjamin agreed. A month is enough time for us to prepare and reflect on what we want to say. As they walked, the conversation flowed naturally, as if they had found a new purpose. The memories of the house were now more than just echoes of pain. They were memories that could be transformed into something positive. And so, under the starry sky, the trio began to plan what would become a meaningful ritual for them. Do you think the voices will continue to guide us? Lucas asked, looking at the sky where the stars shone. I feel that somehow we're all connected now. Aurora nodded. I hope so. The house showed us that we're not alone in our struggle. The voices of the children are a reminder that we all have our battles, and it's important to remember them. Benjamin added, and that we can find strength in each other. We don't have to face our pain alone. We have each other. As they walked, the full moon illuminated the path ahead, and the shadows of the trees seemed to dance around them. It was as if nature was celebrating the new connection they had formed. The feeling of liberation grew with each step they took. Finally, they reached a small clearing where they decided to take a break. They sat on the ground covered with leaves, and the silence of the night enveloped them again. But now, it was a comfortable silence. Do you remember the feeling we had when we started talking about our pain in the house? Aurora asked, looking at her friends. It was as if we were freeing ourselves from a weight. Yes, Benjamin replied. That moment united us in a way I never expected. It was as if the house forced us to face what we feared most, but at the same time offered us a safe space to do so. I feel we're stronger now. Lucas smiled. I never thought I'd be able to share what I shared, but in doing so, I realized that it doesn't make me weaker. In fact, it's the opposite. It's a demonstration of strength. He looked into Aurora and Benjamin's eyes, and I'm grateful that you're by my side. The trio was silent for a moment, absorbing the words they had exchanged. The connection between them was stronger than ever, and the night seemed full of promises. Aurora, looking at the starry sky, felt a wave of gratitude. I just want this feeling to continue, she said, breaking the silence. I want to remember that even in difficult times, we have each other. I want this friendship to help us face whatever comes our way. I agree, Benjamin said, and I promise I'll be here no matter what happens. Lucas nodded. We faced the house together, and now we can face anything together. With that, the three friends stood up and held hands, forming a circle. Their union was a symbol of what they had achieved, the strength to face their pain and the determination to honor the memories of the children. Let's make this happen, Aurora said, looking at her friends, and let's ensure their voices never go silent. And so, under the moonlight and with the starry sky as witness, they began to walk back, not just as friends, but as souls intertwined by experiences that had shaped them in ways that were yet to come. The children's voices would echo in their hearts, reminding them that the search for peace and connection was an eternal journey, but that, together, they could face any storm. The night stretched over the city, and the starry sky reflected the profound transformation that had occurred in the lives of Aurora, Benjamin, and Lucas. As they walked side by side, the feeling of freedom began to take hold of them, but the shadows of the house still danced in their minds. The emotional weight they carried was palpable, but at the same time, there was a new understanding between them, a bond that strengthened with each step. I can't stop thinking about those children, Aurora said, breaking the silence that enveloped them. Her voice had a tone of concern, and the distant look she cast toward the horizon revealed the depth of her thoughts. What happened to them? Did they manage to find peace? Benjamin, who walked beside her, felt his heart tighten. He also thought about the lost souls that had echoed through the house, but the image of the child in the photo still haunted him. I don't know, he replied with a sigh, but I feel that somehow we're connected to them now. What we did by opening up, maybe that helped in some way. Lucas, who was listening attentively, turned to his friends. I think what they needed was to be heard. What we did in there, sharing our stories, was an important step. We can't forget that their pain still exists, even if we're no longer in the house. Aurora nodded, but a cloud of sadness hung over her face. I just hope they find a way to move forward. I can't imagine what it's like to be trapped in a place like that, unable to leave. Her voice trembled slightly, and she felt tears threatening to slip down her face. face. Benjamin, noticing his friend's vulnerability, placed an encouraging hand on her shoulder. "We're here, Aurora, and now that we know we can do something, not just for them, but for us too. We can remember them and fight so that their stories aren't forgotten." The trio stopped at a small lookout that offered a view of the illuminated city below. The lights twinkled like stars on the earth, and for a moment they lost themselves in the beauty of what they saw. The scenery was a stark contrast to the darkness they had faced, and this brought a little comfort to their hearts. "We need to do something to honor their memory," Aurora suggested, looking at her friends with renewed determination. "Maybe we can organize something at school, a campaign or event that brings awareness about the importance of listening to children and caring for each other." Benjamin smiled, admiring his friend's passion. "That's a great idea. We can do a toy drive or something that helps children at risk. That way, we'll be doing something positive and keeping their memory alive." Lucas, who initially seemed hesitant, began to get excited about the proposal. "And we can use social media to reach more people. If we can gather community support, it can make a big difference, not just for us, but for all children who need to be heard." Aurora looked at Lucas, a gleam in her eyes. "Exactly. And we can include the stories we found in the diary. They need to be told." The idea of sharing the experiences of those children seemed to bring a new purpose to everything they had experienced. The trio began to discuss the details of what they could do, getting excited about the possibility of transforming pain into something positive. As they talked, the connection between them solidified even more, and the feeling of relief for finally being able to act on behalf of those children became palpable. "I always thought the stories we heard were just legends, but now I see they have a much greater meaning," Lucas reflected. "I'll never look at an abandoned house the same way again. They're a reminder of what we can lose if we don't pay attention. And more importantly, a reminder that every child has a voice," Benjamin added, feeling inspired. "We should ensure that no one feels invisible. Deep down, we all want to be heard." As the conversation flowed, the friends sat on a weathered wooden bench that had been placed there for people to contemplate the view. The starry sky seemed to shine even more intensely, as if celebrating the rebirth of the three friends. "Do you remember the first time we talked about our insecurities in the house?" Aurora asked, with a nostalgic smile. "I felt so vulnerable, but now, looking at you, I realize it was one of the most important moments of my life." "It was a watershed moment," Benjamin agreed. "We faced our fears and supported each other. I've never felt as strong as I do now, knowing I have you by my side." Lucas smiled, feeling part of something bigger. The house gave us more than just fear. It gave us the opportunity to truly know ourselves. And now we have the chance to do something meaningful together. The trio was silent for a moment, contemplating the magnitude of what they had experienced and the path that still lay ahead. The bond they formed in the abandoned house transcended fear and pain and now manifested in a genuine desire for change. "But what about us?" Aurora asked, breaking the silence again. "How will we deal with our own pain while trying to help others?" Benjamin thought for a moment. "I think the key is to continue supporting each other. We don't have all the answers, and that's okay. We can always come back to talk about this whenever we need to. Being here for each other is what makes us strong." Lucas nodded. "Yes, and we should remember that healing is a process. We can't expect everything to be resolved overnight. We'll need time, and that's normal." Aurora smiled, feeling relieved to hear the encouraging words from her friends. "Thank you, guys. I don't know what I'd do without you. Together, we'll be able to face anything." With that silent promise, they rose from the bench and began to walk back along the illuminated street, feeling renewed. The voices from the house still echoed in their minds, but now they were a reminder of struggle and overcoming, a call to action that could not be ignored. On the way back, they discussed possible ideas for the campaign, laughing and dreaming about the impact they could make. The fear that once dominated their lives was now a distant shadow, replaced by a new hope and a shared purpose. And as the city fell asleep around them, Aurora, Benjamin, and Lucas realized that the journey was just beginning. They had a mission to give voice to the children who couldn't be heard, and in doing so, find their own truths and heal the wounds that still accompanied them. The future seemed promising and full of possibilities, and together they were ready to face it. The The abandoned house, now distant in their memories, still pulsed in the minds of Aurora, Benjamin, and Lucas. The impact of what they had experienced there was undeniable, and the atmosphere of mystery and pain that once enveloped them now seemed like a shadow that followed them, even under the starry sky. They walked in silence, each immersed in their own thoughts, when suddenly Aurora stopped in a small clearing that opened up in front of them. "We need to talk about what happened," Aurora said, breaking the silence that had settled between them. She looked at her friends, her eyes reflecting the intensity of that experience. "We can't just walk away and leave all this behind." Lucas, who was walking beside her, nodded. "I agree. That was intense. I don't know how we're going to deal with this, but we can't ignore it." His tone was serious, and he felt that the words they exchanged were more than just dialogue. They were promises that they wouldn't let the experience be lost in time. Benjamin, who was a bit behind, approached, hearing his friends' voices, but also struggling with his own demons. I never thought the house could affect us so much. The voices, the stories, all of it. It's as if we connected with something greater." He looked at the ground, the dry leaves under his feet crackling as they were stepped on. "But what can we do now?" Aurora took a deep breath, feeling the gentle breeze on her face. "I think we need to do something to honor those children. They were trapped there, and we managed to get out. We can't let their story die with us." "Honor?" Lucas repeated thoughtfully. "How do we do that? I can't just go back and say sorry to ghosts." An ironic smile formed on his lips, but quickly disappeared, replaced by the seriousness of the situation. "What do you suggest?" "We can start by sharing their stories. We can write about what we experienced or even create a memorial, something that remembers them and keeps them alive in our hearts." Aurora was excited about the idea, her face illuminated with determination. Benjamin frowned, an internal conflict forming. "What if that brings us back to the house? I feel there's still something there, something we don't completely understand." He hesitated, remembering the photo of the child who resembled him. "What if there are more people, more stories we need to discover?" Lucas looked at Benjamin, his gaze intense. "Are you saying we should go back after everything we went through?" He couldn't believe his friend was considering this possibility. "I'm not saying we should go back now," Benjamin replied, trying to explain himself. "But maybe it's necessary. If we really want to honor those children, we need to understand what happened. We need to face our fears again." Aurora, observing the growing tension between her friends, decided to intervene. "You're both right. We need to do something, but we can't act impulsively. Let's promise that if we decide to go back, it will be with a clear purpose." She looked into Benjamin's eyes, who seemed lost in his thoughts. "What if we don't find answers?" Lucas questioned, concern evident in his voice. "What if it only brings us more pain?" Benjamin looked at Lucas, feeling the need to convince him. "Well, what if we find the answers we need? What happens if we're able to not only understand, but also help those who couldn't leave?" The idea hung in the air, and Aurora looked at her friends, realizing that Benjamin's passion was contagious. "Maybe what we need is a plan. We won't enter the house without knowing what we're looking for. Let's investigate, research about the children, the legends, everything we can." Lucas, still hesitant, finally nodded. "If we're going to do this, we need to be ready for what we'll find. We can't ignore what the house represents." "So, is it an agreement?" Aurora asked, her gaze hopeful. "We'll honor the children and discover the truth." "Yes, it's an agreement," Benjamin confirmed, a gleam in his eyes. Although he was anxious about the idea of returning, there was a determination that drove him. The atmosphere around them changed. The gentle breeze seemed to bring a sense of renewal, as if nature itself was supporting their decision. The connection they had formed in the house had united them in a way that now manifested in a shared purpose. "We need a place to meet and plan this," Lucas suggested, breaking the silence again. "We can't do this alone. We need more information and possibly help from someone who knows the history of the house. Maybe we can go to the city library," Aurora proposed. "There, we might find books or even records about the children who disappeared. And who knows, maybe someone in the city still remembers the story." "Good idea," Benjamin agreed, feeling more animated. "We can talk to the older residents. They might have stories that no one else knows." The friends began to walk again, the path illuminated by the soft light of the moon. The conversation flowed, and the idea of uniting around a common goal brought a new sense of determination. As they walked, Aurora couldn't help but look back toward the house that was now becoming a silhouette in the darkness. The feeling that something awaited her there, an answer or a connection, was undeniable, but she also knew she couldn't face it alone. The journey would be made together, and together they could face any challenge that arose. "What if we find a way to help those children finally find peace?" Aurora asked, her voice almost a whisper, but full of hope. "Then we'll do it," Lucas replied. "We'll do it for them, and for us." Benjamin smiled, feeling the strength of the friendship that now united them. "We're in this together, and nothing will stop us." As they headed toward the unknown, the stars shone intensely above, as if accompanying each step they took. The journey was just beginning, and the echoes of the house, although distant, remained in their souls, guiding them in search of answers, healing, and perhaps a little peace. Aurora, Benjamin, and Lucas walked together under the starry sky, the cool night breeze caressing their faces. The abandoned house, now a distant shadow, seemed to have left its marks not only on their souls, but also on their stories. The silence that surrounded them was deep, but not uncomfortable. It was a silence laden with understanding and sharing. "I still can't believe we managed to get out of there," said Lucas, breaking the silence. His voice carried a mixture of relief and perplexity. "That house seemed to be alive, almost as if it wanted to keep us prisoners. I never thought I'd feel so connected to a place like that." Aurora looked at Lucas, noticing the intensity in his eyes. "Yes, it was as if it wanted us to hear the stories it held, and we heard them, not just theirs, but also our own," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "What happened there wasn't just about the missing children. It was about us too. Each of us had something to face." Benjamin, who was walking a bit behind, felt a wave of gratitude for his friends. They had faced fears that seemed insurmountable, but together they had found the strength needed to continue. "I've never felt so close to you both," he commented, joining the conversation. "That experience, as frightening as it was, united us in a way I didn't know was possible. I feel we've created a bond that will never break." "It's true," agreed Aurora, stopping to look at Benjamin. "The house challenged us to confront our pain, and that made us stronger. We can't forget what we experienced there. We need to honor the memory of those children, and that begins with our promise." "Promise?" Lucas asked, raising an eyebrow. "What exactly are we promising?" "We promise that we won't forget the stories we heard, that we won't let the voices that cried for help be forgotten," Aurora replied, with an intensity that made Lucas reflect. "They deserve to be remembered, and we also need to remember that we are more than our pain. We need to help each other move forward." Lucas was silent for a moment, absorbing Aurora's words. "You're right. I don't know how I'm going to deal with all this, but I'm sure I can't do it alone. And I don't want to do it alone," he said, looking into Benjamin and Aurora's eyes. "Let's support each other whenever we need it." Benjamin smiled and nodded. "Yes, our journey doesn't end here. We need to continue meeting, talking about what happened and helping each other deal with it. Each of us has our own struggles, and that only makes us stronger when we're together." As they walked, the path became more familiar, and the city lights began to appear in the distance. The road leading back home seemed less frightening now, illuminated by the soft light of the stars. Aurora felt a warmth in her heart as she realized that despite everything, there was a light of hope in the darkness. "I always thought that pain was something you had to face alone," said Lucas, his voice lower. "But now I see that's not the case. Pain can unite us if we let it. The house was a catalyst, but it's up to us to continue this journey. That's what makes friendship so powerful," said Aurora, looking at Lucas. "It helps us face what we can't face alone. And even though the house was a place of suffering, it also became a place of healing for us. And not just healing, but also growth," added Benjamin. "We learned about ourselves and about each other. I would never have been able to face my fears if I hadn't been with you." They continued to walk, talking about their hopes and fears. The conversation flowed naturally, as if they had known each other all their lives. The weight that had once seemed so oppressive now seemed lighter, shared between them. When they finally reached the city, the bright lights and sounds of nightlife greeted them. People passed by, some laughing and others talking, and for a moment Aurora felt that life was moving in an impressive way, even though they had just gone through such an intense experience. "Shall we stop somewhere for a drink?" Benjamin suggested. suggested, gesturing toward a cafe that had its lights on. "I think we need some time to process all this and, who knows, celebrate our exit from that house." Aurora and Lucas agreed, and together they entered the cafe. The smell of fresh coffee and baked goods enveloped them, bringing a sense of normality that seemed a bit alien after the experience they had lived through. They sat at a table near the window, where they could observe the movement outside. While waiting for their orders, Aurora looked at her friends. "What do you think will happen now? How are we going to deal with everything we experienced?" "I think we'll carry it with us," Lucas replied, looking at the cup of coffee he had just received. "We can't simply forget, but at the same time, we need to find ways to move forward. I don't want this experience to define who I am, but I want it to help me be a better version of myself." "I agree," Benjamin added, taking a sip of his coffee. "The house taught us that pain doesn't have to be carried alone, and more importantly, that hope and friendship can help us heal. Let's make an effort to meet regularly, so we can share our struggles and achievements." Aurora smiled, feeling a warmth in her heart. "That sounds perfect, and whenever we need to, we can return to that house, not physically, but in spirit. We can remember the stories, the voices, and use that to make us stronger." The trio spent the night talking, laughing, and sharing their hopes for the future. The light atmosphere of the cafe contrasted with the density of the house, but somehow it was all part of the same journey. They were ready to face whatever came, together, and that gave them renewed strength. As they left the cafe, the fresh night air enveloped them again. The sky was clear and starry, and Aurora looked at the stars, feeling grateful to have friends who supported her. "Let's always remember that even in the darkest nights, the light of the stars is always there," she said, and her friends agreed with a nod. Together they walked toward the horizon, ready to face what the future held for them, aware that the journey of healing was just beginning, but that together they could overcome any challenge. And so, under the cloak of night, the echoes of the house remained in their memories, not as a burden, but as a reminder that friendship and courage can transform even the darkest experiences into light and hope. Don't forget to leave your like, comment what you thought, and subscribe to the channel.